My name is Sofia Martinez, and I'm 28 years old. Tonight was supposed to be my birthday celebration at Le Bernardin, but instead, it became the night everything changed forever. As I sat at our family table, wearing my best black dress and feeling confident for once, I heard my stepmother Celeste whisper to my stepsister Brittany in what they thought was their secret language. "Elle ressemble à un cochon ce soir," Celeste said with a cruel smile, her French accent perfect and poisonous. "She looks like a pig tonight." My heart stopped, but my face remained perfectly calm because they had no idea that I understood every single word they had just said. Before we dive into this story of betrayal and revenge, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story resonates with you, please hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories. You won't believe what happens next when a family underestimates the quiet girl they've been tormenting for years. Now, let's get into how I discovered my family's true nature and what I did about it. Growing up in the Martinez household wasn't the fairy tale most people imagined. My mother died when I was 14, leaving behind a devastated father and a daughter who never quite fit the family mold. I was the bookish one, the quiet one, the one who preferred libraries to parties and studying to socializing. My father, Harrison, always loved me, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes when other families would show off their popular, beautiful daughters while I brought home academic awards that seemed to matter less and less each year. When I was 15, everything changed dramatically. Dad met Celeste Dubois at a business conference in Montreal, and within 6 months, she had moved into our Connecticut home with her 18-year-old daughter Brittany. Celeste was everything I wasn't: sophisticated, stylish, and fluent in French from her years living in Paris. She had this way of making my father feel worldly and cultured, something my mother's simple Midwestern charm had never provided. Brittany was the daughter I could never be: tall, blonde, socially connected, and effortlessly beautiful in a way that made heads turn wherever she went. From the very beginning, Celeste and Brittany had their private language. They would speak French whenever they wanted to discuss something they didn't want me to understand, which happened constantly. At first, I thought it was just their way of maintaining their cultural identity, but as months turned into years, I began to realize these conversations often involved me. I would catch my name mentioned between rapid French phrases, followed by knowing looks and barely concealed smirks. They thought they were so clever, having their secret conversations right in front of the stupid American girl who couldn't possibly understand their sophisticated European language. What they didn't know was that their casual cruelty had lit a fire inside me that would burn for over a decade. At 16, I enrolled in every language class my high school offered: French, Spanish, German, Italian. When those weren't enough, I found online tutors and spent my babysitting money on language learning software. By my senior year, I was already fluent in 4 languages, but I kept studying. I told my father I wanted to pursue linguistics in college, and he was proud but puzzled by my sudden passion for languages. I never told him the real reason. I needed to know what Celeste and Brittany were saying about me. College was my escape and my training ground. I majored in applied linguistics at NYU, adding Portuguese and improving my accent work until I could pass for a native speaker in any of my 6 languages. I graduated summa cum laude with a thesis on multilingual deception detection, ironic considering I was living the ultimate linguistic deception myself. My professors praised my natural ear for languages and my intuitive understanding of cultural nuances. What they didn't realize was that my motivation came from years of being the subject of foreign language mockery in my own home. Throughout college and into my early career, I maintained the facade of being the monolingual American daughter. Whenever Celeste and Brittany spoke French around me, I would look confused or ask them to translate, which they would do with fake sweetness while exchanging amused glances. "Oh, we were just discussing the weather," Celeste would say, when I had clearly heard them planning ways to ensure I wouldn't be invited to family gatherings or discussing how my father's money would be better spent on Brittany's designer wardrobe than my education. The most painful discovery came during my junior year of college, when I overheard them planning to convince my father that I was too academically focused and socially awkward to ever attract a suitable husband. They spoke about how my father's inheritance from his wealthy parents should go to ensuring Brittany's future rather than wasting it on someone who would probably end up as a spinster librarian. That conversation, conducted entirely in rapid Parisian French over Christmas dinner while I sat 3 feet away, taught me that their cruelty went far beyond casual family dynamics. They were actively working to undermine my relationship with my father and my future security. By the time I landed my job at Global Link International Translation Services, I had become a master of linguistic espionage. I could understand every word they said, analyze their real intentions, and plan accordingly, all while maintaining the perfect cover of ignorant comprehension. They had created their own worst enemy, and they had absolutely no idea. My years of secret language acquisition had given me more than just professional skills. They had given me the tools I would eventually need to defend myself against the people who should have been my family. Landing the position at Global Link felt like finally finding my place in the world. As a senior linguistic specialist, I was responsible for high-level translation work with international clients, particularly those dealing with complex legal and business documents. My supervisor praised my attention to detail and my ability to catch nuanced meanings that other translators missed. What he didn't know was that my skills had been honed by years of covert surveillance in my own home, making me exceptionally adept at detecting hidden meanings and unspoken intentions. Everything was going perfectly until my 3rd year at the company, when I noticed subtle changes in how my colleagues treated me. Douglas Chun, our department director and apparently an old fraternity brother of my father's from their Yale days, began questioning my work quality in ways he never had before. Small mistakes that would normally be overlooked were suddenly major issues. Projects I had successfully handled for months were reassigned without explanation. When I asked Douglas about these changes, he gave me vague responses about needing to diversify project assignments and ensure quality control across all team members. The real blow came when I lost the Marseille Industries account, a major French pharmaceutical company that had specifically requested me as their translator after working with me successfully for 18 months. Douglas called me into his office and explained that the client had expressed concerns about the accuracy of recent translations and requested a different team member. I knew this was impossible because I had maintained direct contact with their project manager, who had consistently praised my work and cultural understanding. When I tried to defend myself, Douglas cut me off and suggested that perhaps I was becoming overconfident in my abilities. What I didn't realize at the time was that Celeste had been orchestrating a careful campaign behind the scenes. She had reached out to Douglas under the pretense of a concerned stepmother, expressing worry about my mental health and professional stability. During their lunch meetings at expensive Manhattan restaurants, she painted a picture of a young woman struggling with depression, alcohol dependency, and reality disconnection issues. She shared fabricated stories about finding empty wine bottles hidden in my childhood bedroom and described concerning behavior patterns that supposedly indicated psychological instability. Celeste was masterful in her manipulation, never making direct accusations, but instead planting seeds of doubt through carefully crafted concern. She told Douglas about my obsessive behavior regarding language study, suggesting that my intense focus on linguistics was actually a form of escapism from real-world responsibilities. She mentioned my lack of serious romantic relationships, implying that I had difficulty maintaining normal social connections. Most damaging of all, she suggested that my confidence in my translation abilities might be masking deeper insecurities that could lead to professional mistakes. Douglas, having known my father since college and trusting Celeste's apparent concern for family welfare, began viewing my work through a completely different lens. Every minor revision request became evidence of carelessness. My thorough approach to complex translations was reframed as excessive time consumption. My preference for working independently rather than collaborating on every small decision was interpreted as antisocial behavior that could indicate larger problems. Meanwhile, Brittany was executing her own part of their coordinated attack. She had somehow obtained access to my work email address and began sending anonymous messages to my colleagues, suggesting that I had been taking credit for collaborative work and exaggerating my language credentials. She created fake social media accounts that posted negative reviews about Global Link services, specifically mentioning poor French translation quality, which inevitably led back to questions about my competence. The situation reached a crisis point when Brittany planted plagiarized content in one of my translation reports. She had access to my laptop during a family gathering and inserted several paragraphs from an online translation service into a document I had already completed. When the client's legal team ran the document through plagiarism detection software as part of their standard review process, the copied content was immediately flagged. Douglas was furious, and I was given a formal written warning for academic dishonesty, despite my protests that I had never seen the plagiarized content before. My reputation within the company was systematically destroyed over the course of 6 months. Colleagues who had previously sought my expertise began avoiding me. The promotion I had been expecting was given to a junior colleague with half my experience. My salary was frozen, and I was moved to less prestigious accounts with lower compensation rates. The psychological impact was devastating, as I watched my carefully built career crumble under accusations I couldn't disprove and attacks I couldn't defend against because I didn't even understand where they were coming from. The most crushing blow was losing my professional confidence. For the first time in my adult life, I began doubting my own abilities. Maybe I wasn't as good at translation work as I thought. Maybe my language skills weren't as advanced as I believed. Maybe Celeste and Brittany were right to view me as the inadequate family member who couldn't live up to normal standards. The woman who had spent years secretly gathering intelligence through linguistic mastery was being defeated by people who didn't even know she could understand their conversations. Tyler Brooks entered my life during my second year at Global Link, and for the first time since my mother's death, I believed I had found someone who valued me for exactly who I was. We met at a professional development conference where I was presenting on cross-cultural communication strategies, and he approached me afterward with genuine appreciation for my insights into linguistic nuances. Tyler worked in international business development, and our shared interest in global markets created an immediate connection that felt both intellectual and romantic. Our relationship developed slowly and naturally over 2 years of shared experiences, deep conversations, and what I believed was mutual respect and affection. Tyler appreciated my intelligence, supported my career ambitions, and seemed genuinely uninterested in the superficial qualities that had always made me feel inadequate around my family. He never made me feel like I needed to be prettier, more social, or more conventional. Instead, he celebrated my analytical mind, my cultural knowledge, and my unique perspective on international business relationships. When Tyler started attending family gatherings, I was hopeful that finally having someone who valued my qualities would help my father and stepfamily see me differently. Tyler was handsome, successful, and charming, exactly the type of partner that should have made parents proud. I thought his presence would prove that I was capable of attracting quality relationships and building a normal adult life, countering whatever negative narratives Celeste and Brittany had been spreading about my social inadequacies. However, I completely underestimated Celeste's strategic thinking and Brittany's ruthless ambition. Instead of accepting Tyler as evidence of my worth, they saw him as an opportunity to further undermine my position in the family while gaining a valuable asset for themselves. Celeste began inviting Tyler to separate family events, business networking gatherings, and cultural activities that didn't include me. She positioned these invitations as wanting to get to know him better and make him feel welcomed into their sophisticated social circle. Brittany, meanwhile, launched a carefully orchestrated seduction campaign that was both subtle and devastating. She began seeking Tyler's advice on business matters, praising his expertise, and creating opportunities for private conversations about topics that supposedly interested them both. Unlike my quiet, intellectual approach to relationships, Brittany offered excitement, social connections, and access to a lifestyle that my modest translator salary could never provide. The psychological manipulation was expertly executed. During family dinners that Tyler attended, Celeste and Brittany would speak French about upcoming social events, exclusive business opportunities, and cultural experiences that would benefit someone in Tyler's position. They would then translate these conversations for Tyler's benefit, always emphasizing how much they thought he would enjoy these sophisticated activities, while subtly implying that I would be bored or uncomfortable in such settings. Celeste began offering Tyler investment opportunities through her business connections, presenting herself as a wealthy, well-connected woman who could open doors that might otherwise remain closed to him. She loaned him money for a technology startup he wanted to launch, creating financial dependence while positioning herself as someone who believed in his potential more than anyone else ever had. These loans came with informal but clearly understood expectations about loyalty and gratitude that gradually shifted Tyler's allegiances. Meanwhile, Brittany was providing emotional support and romantic attention that made my quiet, bookish personality seem boring by comparison. She was spontaneous where I was predictable, socially dynamic where I was intellectually focused, and financially free where I was budget-conscious. She could offer expensive dinners, exciting weekend trips, and introduction to influential people who could advance Tyler's career in ways I never could. The final phase of their campaign involved convincing Tyler that I was holding him back from reaching his full potential. They suggested that my depression and career struggles were creating negative energy that would drag down his own success. They implied that my family relationships were toxic and that staying with me would mean accepting permanent association with dysfunction and failure. Most effectively, they convinced him that leaving me would be an act of kindness, freeing both of us from an incompatible relationship that was preventing us from finding happiness. When Tyler ended our relationship through a text message sent while he was supposedly at a work conference, I was completely unprepared for the emotional devastation. The message was brief and cruel, mentioning that he had realized we wanted different things from life and that he needed to prioritize his career advancement over romantic relationships. There was no conversation, no opportunity for discussion, and no acknowledgement of the 2 years we had spent building what I believed was a strong partnership. 1 week later, Brittany posted photos on social media of herself and Tyler at charity galas, business conferences, and romantic restaurants throughout the city. The timeline made it clear that their relationship had been developing for months while Tyler was still with me, making me feel not only rejected but also deceived and humiliated. The man I had trusted with my dreams, my insecurities, and my plans for the future had been sharing all of that information with the people who wanted to destroy me. The cruelest revelation came when Tyler began providing Celeste and Brittany with personal information about my struggles at work, my financial concerns, and my emotional vulnerabilities. Details I had shared with him in confidence were being used as ammunition in their ongoing campaign to convince my father that I was unstable and unworthy of family support. The person I had believed loved and protected me had become their most valuable intelligence source in their war against my happiness and security. The call from the hospital came at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday in October, jolting me awake with the kind of panic that immediately tells you life is about to change forever. My father had suffered a massive heart attack while working late in his home office, and the paramedics had found him unconscious on the floor surrounded by scattered financial documents. As I rushed to Mount Sinai Hospital, my mind raced through 1,000 fears about losing the only family member who had ever truly loved me, never imagining that this medical emergency would become the perfect opportunity for Celeste and Brittany to execute their most devastating attack yet. During the first week of Dad's hospitalization, I practically lived in the cardiac intensive care unit, holding his hand through tubes and monitors while doctors explained the severity of his condition and the long recovery process ahead. Celeste and Brittany made carefully timed appearances that maximized their visibility to medical staff and family friends while minimizing actual caregiving responsibilities. They would arrive with expensive flower arrangements and gourmet food gifts, stay just long enough to be photographed for social media updates, and then leave me alone to handle the real work of coordinating with doctors, managing insurance paperwork, and providing emotional support. What I didn't realize during those exhausting days and sleepless nights was that Celeste and Brittany were using my dedicated presence at the hospital as an opportunity to establish themselves as Dad's primary family contacts and decision makers. While I focused on his medical care, they were meeting with his personal attorney, his financial advisor, and his business partners, presenting themselves as the stable family members who needed to step up during this crisis because his daughter was too emotionally overwhelmed to handle important responsibilities. The first sign of their financial manipulation came when I tried to access Dad's business account to pay some urgent invoices that had been piling up during his hospitalization. The bank informed me that my authorized access had been suspended pending review of account management protocols. When I called Celeste to ask about this development, she explained with fake concern that Dad's attorney had recommended restricting account access until his recovery was complete to prevent any confusion or mistakes during this stressful time. Within 2 weeks, a disturbing pattern emerged. Franklin Walsh, an attorney I had never heard of before, began appearing at the hospital with legal documents that required Dad's signature. Celeste explained that Franklin was helping organize Dad's affairs to ensure everything was properly managed during his recovery, but she was always vague about the specific details of these documents. When I asked to review the paperwork, Franklin would mention client confidentiality and suggest that these matters were too complex for someone without legal training to understand properly. The most devastating blow came when I discovered they had convinced Dad that I had been stealing money from his accounts to cover gambling debts I didn't have. Using doctored bank statements and fabricated evidence, they created a compelling narrative of financial betrayal that played on my father's vulnerabilities while he was weakened by medication and medical stress. They produced fake casino receipts with my forged signature, altered email communications that appeared to show me requesting money transfers, and even created false credit card statements showing expenses at gambling establishments I had never visited. Celeste's presentation of this fake evidence was masterfully executed. She approached Dad during one of his more lucid moments, expressing heartbreak and concern about having to share such devastating news during his recovery. She showed him the falsified bank statements with tears in her eyes, explaining how she had discovered these irregularities while trying to help organize his finances. She suggested that my constant presence at the hospital might be motivated by guilt rather than love, and that my emotional behavior was actually evidence of someone struggling with addiction and financial desperation. Franklin Walsh provided the legal framework for their accusations, explaining to Dad how financial elder abuse was unfortunately common in families dealing with medical crises. He described cases where adult children had taken advantage of parents' medical vulnerabilities to access funds for personal problems, making the situation seem both legally serious and emotionally urgent. He recommended immediate action to protect Dad's assets, while suggesting that I might need professional help rather than family punishment. The psychological manipulation was devastating to witness, even though I only understood pieces of it at the time. Dad, weakened by his heart attack and confused by medication, was being presented with detailed evidence of betrayal by his biological daughter while being supported and protected by his stepfamily. Celeste and Brittany were positioning themselves as the people who truly cared about his welfare, while I was painted as someone who had taken advantage of his trust and love for my own selfish purposes. When Dad finally signed the revised will that removed me as his primary beneficiary, I learned about it through a certified letter delivered to my apartment 2 days later. The document was cold and legal, explaining that due to recent discoveries about my financial misconduct and personal problems, my inheritance would be held in trust pending resolution of my gambling addiction and repayment of stolen funds. I was also informed that my access to the family home was revoked immediately and that I had 1 week to remove my personal belongings under supervised conditions. The house I had lived in since childhood was suddenly forbidden territory, guarded by Celeste and Brittany, who had installed new security systems and changed all the locks. When I arrived to collect my belongings, they allowed me exactly 3 hours to pack everything I wanted to keep, under Franklin Walsh's supervision, to ensure I didn't attempt to take anything that belonged to the estate. They watched with satisfaction as I loaded my childhood photos, college textbooks, and professional clothes into garbage bags, knowing they had successfully erased me from the family I had been born into. Moving back to my tiny studio apartment felt like admitting defeat in the most humiliating way possible. The space that had once felt cozy and independent now seemed pathetic and inadequate, especially when compared to the spacious family home where Celeste and Brittany were now living as the rightful inheritors of Dad's wealth. Every day became a struggle to afford basic expenses on my reduced salary from Global Inc., while knowing that people who had entered my family as outsiders were now living in luxury that should have been my security. The financial pressure was crushing, but the emotional devastation was worse. I had lost my father, my family, my home, and my inheritance all in one coordinated attack that I was completely powerless to defend against. The people who had orchestrated this destruction were living in my childhood home, spending money that my grandparents had intended for my future, and celebrating their victory while I struggled to pay rent on a studio apartment that felt like a prison sentence. The morning Douglas Chin called me into his office for what he euphemistically termed a performance review meeting. I already knew my career at Global Inc. was over. The previous month had been a series of increasingly aggressive critiques, impossible deadlines, and public humiliations that made it clear someone wanted me gone. What I hadn't anticipated was the methodical cruelty of how they would destroy not just my current position, but my entire future in the translation industry. Douglas began the meeting by expressing disappointment in my recent work quality and professional behavior, citing specific examples that I knew had been either fabricated or manipulated. He mentioned the plagiarism incident, my supposed inability to meet client expectations, and what he called concerning reports from colleagues about your reliability and team collaboration skills. When I attempted to defend myself or provide context for these accusations, he cut me off with bureaucratic efficiency, explaining that the decision had already been made and this meeting was merely a formality. The termination letter was comprehensive and devastating. Beyond simply firing me, it included language about professional misconduct that would make future employment nearly impossible. Douglas had crafted the document to suggest patterns of ethical violations, quality control failures, and workplace relationship problems that would appear in any background check or reference inquiry. He explained that while the company wouldn't actively disparage me to future employers, they also couldn't provide positive recommendations given the circumstances of my departure. What became clear over the following weeks was that Celeste had orchestrated a comprehensive campaign to destroy my professional reputation throughout the entire translation industry in New York City. She had leveraged her social connections and business relationships to spread carefully crafted rumors about my competence, reliability, and personal stability to key decision-makers at every major translation service in the metropolitan area. Her approach was subtle but devastating. She never made direct accusations, but instead shared concerns about my mental health and professional judgment with influential people who trusted her sophistication and business acumen. Every job interview became an exercise in humiliation as potential employers asked increasingly specific questions about my departure from Global Inc., my relationship with previous supervisors, and my ability to handle professional stress. Some interviews were terminated early when hiring managers received real-time phone calls from industry contacts warning them about my supposed problems. Others dragged on through multiple rounds of questioning that focused more on my personal stability than my qualifications, making it clear that my reputation had been poisoned beyond repair. The financial pressure became unbearable within 2 months of losing my job. My studio apartment rent consumed nearly all of my unemployment benefits, leaving almost nothing for food, utilities, or basic necessities. I was forced to sell my furniture, my professional wardrobe, my language learning materials, and eventually my laptop computer just to survive from week to week. The woman who had once taken pride in her independence and professional success was reduced to counting quarters for grocery shopping and avoiding phone calls from creditors. My health deteriorated rapidly under the stress of unemployment, financial desperation, and social isolation. I lost weight dramatically, developed chronic insomnia, and began experiencing panic attacks that made it difficult to function in interview situations or social settings. When I finally sought help from a mental health counselor, the co-payments and medication costs consumed money I needed for rent, creating an impossible choice between psychological treatment and basic survival. The social isolation was perhaps the most crushing aspect of my destruction. Friends from college and professional acquaintances began distancing themselves as word spread about my problems and dramatic fall from grace. Former colleagues stopped returning my calls, Networking contacts became unavailable and social invitations disappeared entirely. The few people who maintained contact treated me with the careful concern reserved for someone whose life has become a cautionary tale rather than a relationship worth maintaining. Even my attempts to find temporary or part-time work were sabotaged by the thorough campaign against my reputation. Retail employers were reluctant to hire someone with my education level for fear I would leave quickly for better opportunities, while service industry positions were eliminated after background checks revealed my controversial departure from Global Inc. Tutoring and freelance translation work dried up as word spread through professional networks about my supposed ethical violations and quality problems. The lowest point came on a Thursday evening in December when I sat in my nearly empty apartment, surrounded by past due bills and rejection letters, writing what I intended to be my suicide note. The woman who had spent years secretly mastering 6 languages and building professional expertise felt completely powerless against people who had systematically destroyed everything she had worked to achieve. I had fought so hard to prove my worth and build a life of meaning, only to discover that none of my efforts mattered when faced with people who were willing to lie, cheat, and manipulate without any moral constraints. As I sat there with my laptop open to a blank document, trying to find words to explain why I was giving up, my phone rang with a call from an unknown number. For some reason, perhaps just desperate for any human contact, I answered instead of letting it go to voicemail. The voice on the other end was Brittany, calling to gloat about her engagement to Tyler and to invite me to their wedding as an act of family forgiveness. Her tone was sickeningly sweet as she described the expensive venue, the designer dress, and the honeymoon trip to Europe that Tyler was paying for with his successful new business. But then she made a mistake that changed everything. Thinking I couldn't understand, she spoke to Celeste in French about how perfectly their plan had worked and how easy it had been to destroy someone so naive and trusting.
Elle était si facile à détruire, she said, logging. She was so easy to destroy. Maintenant nous avons tout ce que nous voulions.
Now we have everything we wanted. As I listened to them celebrate my destruction in their secret language, something inside me shifted from despair to fury. They had underestimated me for the last time. The law offices of Miranda Cole and Associates occupied the 32nd floor of a Manhattan high-rise, and as I sat in the elegant waiting room 3 days after my moment of revelation, I felt like an imposter in my discount store interview suit surrounded by the obvious wealth and power of successful legal practice. I had found Miranda's name through desperate internet searching for attorneys who specialized in financial fraud and family disputes, and her willingness to meet with me despite my inability to pay a substantial retainer felt like the first piece of good fortune I had experienced in months. Miranda Cole was not what I expected from a high-powered Manhattan attorney. She was perhaps 50 years old, with graying hair, practical clothes, and an intensity that suggested someone who had built her reputation through determination rather than connections. When I began explaining my situation, stumbling through the complex family dynamics and financial manipulations while trying not to sound paranoid or unstable, she listened with the focused attention of someone evaluating evidence rather than hearing a sob story. The turning point in our conversation came when I mentioned overhearing Celeste and Brittany's French conversations about their plans. Miranda immediately understood the significance of my linguistic abilities and the evidential value of information they thought I couldn't understand. She asked detailed questions about the timing of these conversations, the specific content I had overheard, and my ability to provide accurate translations that could be verified by independent experts. Miranda's preliminary investigation revealed disturbing patterns that validated my suspicions about Celeste and Brittany's criminal behavior. Within 1 week, her research team had uncovered Celeste's previous marriage to a wealthy businessman in Montreal who had died under suspicious circumstances involving medication interactions. While no criminal charges had been filed, the insurance investigation had noted several irregularities in the timeline of his death and Celeste's immediate departure for the United States afterward. The background check on Brittany revealed an even more shocking criminal history. Under her birth name Bridget Sullivan, she had been investigated by federal authorities for money laundering activities connected to a defunct investment firm in Boston. While charges had never been filed due to lack of evidence, The investigative records showed a pattern of creating false identities, manipulating financial documents, and associating with known criminal organizations involved in sophisticated fraud schemes. Miranda explained that while this historical evidence was valuable for understanding their capabilities and motivations, we needed current proof of their criminal activities related to my father's estate. She proposed a comprehensive strategy for gathering evidence that would leverage my unique linguistic abilities while building a legal case strong enough to pursue criminal prosecution rather than just civil recovery. The plan required me to voluntarily re-enter the family dynamic that had nearly destroyed me, but this time as an undercover investigator rather than a victim. Miranda provided me with sophisticated recording equipment disguised as everyday jewelry and accessories, taught me techniques for encouraging incriminating conversations, and helped me develop strategies for appearing defeated while actually gathering intelligence. Detective James Rivera became our second crucial ally when Miranda approached him about the case through her professional network. James had worked with my grandfather during his police career and remembered him as an honest cop who had helped clean up corruption in the department during the 1970s. When Miranda explained how his former partner's granddaughter was being systematically defrauded by her stepfamily, James agreed to provide unofficial investigative support that could eventually lead to official police involvement. James brought 30 years of experience in financial fraud investigation to our team, along with technical resources and analytical capabilities that private investigation couldn't match. He was particularly interested in the sophisticated nature of the document forgery and financial manipulation, suggesting that Celeste and Brittany were operating at a level that indicated professional criminal experience rather than amateur family scheming. The three of us developed a comprehensive strategy that would require several months of careful planning and execution. My role would be to re-establish contact with Celeste and Brittany, convince them that I was defeated and desperate, and create opportunities for them to discuss their past crimes and future plans while being recorded. Miranda would handle the legal framework for using this evidence in both criminal and civil proceedings, while James would coordinate with federal investigators who specialized in cross-border fraud cases. The psychological preparation for this operation was almost as challenging as the technical aspects. I would need to convincingly portray someone who had been broken by their attacks, while actually maintaining the emotional strength to gather evidence against people who had already demonstrated their willingness to destroy me completely. Miranda arranged for me to work with a counselor who specialized in supporting undercover operatives and witnesses in high-stress situations. Training with the recording equipment required learning to appear natural while wearing devices that could capture high-quality audio from conversations in various environments. I practiced techniques for encouraging people to talk about sensitive topics, for steering conversations toward useful subjects, and for maintaining cover even when hearing information that would normally provoke emotional reactions. The most crucial element of our preparation involved developing my linguistic strategy. Since Celeste and Brittany would likely continue using French for their most sensitive conversations, I needed to perfect my ability to understand everything while appearing completely confused. Miranda brought in an acting coach who helped me develop convincing facial expressions and body language for someone who was hearing foreign language she couldn't comprehend. After 6 weeks of preparation, I was ready to re-enter the world that had nearly killed me, but this time I wouldn't be facing it as a naive victim. I would be walking into their territory as a trained investigator with powerful allies and the tools necessary to gather evidence of their crimes. The woman who had been crushed by their systematic destruction was about to become their worst nightmare, and they would never see it coming because they had always underestimated the quiet girl who spent too much time with books instead of people. Returning to my stepfamily's world required swallowing more pride than I thought I possessed, but the performance had to be absolutely convincing if we were going to gather the evidence necessary to destroy them legally rather than just emotionally. I spent an entire morning practicing my approach in Miranda's office, rehearsing the defeated tone, the desperate body language, and the humble requests for forgiveness that would make Celeste and Brittany believe they had won so completely that I posed no possible threat to their position. The call to Celeste was one of the hardest things I had ever done, requiring me to sound broken and desperate while actually feeling empowered for the first time in months. I explained through carefully rehearsed tears that I had lost my job, my apartment was about to be foreclosed, and I had finally realized how badly I had damaged my relationships with the people who truly loved me. I begged for a chance to apologize in person and to prove that I was ready to accept responsibility for my mistakes and change my life completely. Celeste's response was exactly what Miranda had predicted. Immediate satisfaction poorly concealed behind fake concern and generous offers of help. She insisted that I come to dinner that very evening, expressing how worried she and Brittany had been about my welfare and how happy they were that I was finally ready to heal the family relationships that had been damaged by my poor choices. Her tone conveyed triumph disguised as compassion, making it clear that she viewed my surrender as confirmation of her superior strategy and power. The dinner at my childhood home was surreal in ways I hadn't anticipated. Sitting at the dining room table where I had eaten thousands of meals as a child, surrounded by furniture and photographs from my family's history, while Celeste and Brittany played the role of concerned family members, was both heartbreaking and infuriating. They had redecorated extensively, replacing my mother's warm, comfortable aesthetic with Celeste's cold, expensive sophistication, making the house feel like a museum of someone else's life rather than the home where I had grown up. Throughout dinner, I maintained my performance of grateful humility while my concealed recording devices captured every word of their gloating celebration. They took turns describing how worried they had been about my financial situation, my employment problems, and my apparent emotional instability, all while making it clear that they viewed these hardships as natural consequences of my character flaws rather than results of their orchestrated campaign against me. The real breakthrough came after dinner when they offered me wine and began speaking French about their future plans, clearly believing that I was too defeated to be a threat and too ignorant to understand their language. Celeste described in detail how they had systematically destroyed my reputation in the translation industry, naming specific people they had contacted and exactly what stories they had told about my professional competence and personal stability. Brittany's contribution was even more valuable from an evidential standpoint. She bragged about her sophisticated forgery techniques, explaining how she had created the fake gambling receipts and altered bank statements that convinced my father I was stealing from him. She described the process of accessing my work computer to plant plagiarized content and her methods for creating false social media accounts to spread negative reviews about my professional work. But the most shocking revelation came when they began discussing their plans for my father's continued medical care. Speaking in rapid French that they assumed I couldn't follow, they described how they were gradually increasing his heart medication dosages beyond prescribed levels, creating symptoms that would justify his continued dependence on their care, while accelerating his physical decline. Celeste had researched the interaction effects of his various prescriptions and was deliberately creating dangerous combinations that would appear accidental to medical professionals. The conversation turned to their timeline for completely taking over Dad's estate within the next year. They discussed specific legal strategies for having him declared incompetent due to medication side effects, which would give them complete control over his finances and medical decisions. Brittany mentioned that Franklin Walsh had already prepared the necessary paperwork for this eventuality, and they just needed to establish a sufficient medical record of cognitive decline. When they offered to let me stay in the guest room temporarily while I got back on my feet, I realized they wanted to keep me close so they could monitor my activities and ensure I didn't become a problem for their final phase of operation. They saw my presence as useful for maintaining the appearance of family unity while they completed their takeover of Dad's assets, never imagining that I was actually gathering evidence of their criminal conspiracy. My acceptance of their offer provided perfect cover for extended surveillance opportunities. Over the following 3 weeks, I recorded dozens of conversations in French, Spanish, and Italian as they coordinated with various accomplices and discussed details of their fraud operation that they never would have revealed if they knew I could understand them. They spoke about previous victims, techniques they had learned from criminal associates, and future plans for expanding their operations once they had secured Dad's estate. The most damning evidence came when Celeste received a phone call from Montreal about the investigation into her previous husband's death. She spent an hour speaking rapid French with someone who was clearly helping her create false evidence and bribe witnesses to ensure the case remained closed. During this conversation, She explicitly admitted to poisoning her former husband with medication interactions while laughing about how easily doctors accepted accidental overdose explanations when dealing with elderly patients with multiple prescriptions. Meanwhile, Detective Rivera's parallel investigation was uncovering the broader criminal network that supported Celeste and Brittany's activities. Bank records revealed patterns of suspicious transfers, forged documents, and identity theft that connected them to at least 6 other families who had been systematically defrauded through similar techniques. Federal investigators were building a comprehensive case that would prosecute them not just for their crimes against my family, but for their entire criminal enterprise. After 3 weeks of gathering evidence while living in my childhood home as a supposed charity case, we had recorded over 40 hours of incriminating conversations in multiple languages, documented their systematic fraud operation, and gathered enough evidence to pursue criminal prosecution under federal racketeering statutes. The people who had destroyed my life were about to discover that the naive victim they thought they had crushed had become their most dangerous enemy. Planning the confrontation required coordination between multiple law enforcement agencies, careful timing to maximize the evidential value of recorded confessions, and theatrical staging that would give Celeste and Brittany enough confidence to reveal the full extent of their criminal operation before realizing they had been caught. Miranda suggested using Dad's 75th birthday party as the perfect setting, since it would bring together all the witnesses, victims, and accomplices whose presence would be necessary for comprehensive prosecution. The guest list for Dad's birthday party read like a catalog of everyone Celeste and Brittany had manipulated over the past 3 years. Douglas Chun and several of my former colleagues from Global Link would be attending, along with Franklin Walsh, various business associates who had provided financing for their schemes, and family friends who had been fed lies about my character and mental health. Most importantly, Tyler would be there with Brittany, providing an opportunity to confront their betrayal publicly while gathering evidence about his complicity in their financial crimes. I spent the morning of the party installing additional recording equipment throughout the house with James Rivera's technical support team. We placed sophisticated surveillance devices in every room where sensitive conversations might occur, creating a comprehensive audio and video record that would capture everything said and done during the evening. The equipment was invisible to casual observation but powerful enough to record clear evidence even during large group conversations or background discussions. Miranda had coached me extensively on the psychological tactics for encouraging full confessions from people who believed they were safe from consequences. The key was to make them feel so triumphant and secure in their victory that they would brag about their methods and reveal information about other crimes that we hadn't yet discovered. I needed to appear completely defeated while actually controlling the flow of conversation toward the most legally valuable admissions. The party began with the usual social dynamics I remembered from previous family gatherings. Celeste and Brittany holding court with sophisticated conversations about art, travel, and business, while I remained quietly in the background as the awkward family member who didn't quite belong. Dad seemed genuinely happy to see me participating in family activities again, though I could see the physical deterioration that resulted from their systematic poisoning disguised as medical care. The first major breakthrough came when Douglas Chun approached me to offer condescending sympathy about my employment situation. His comments revealed specific details about the campaign Celeste had conducted against my professional reputation, including conversations she had initiated with industry leaders throughout New York City. As he described her concerns about my mental health and work quality, he inadvertently provided evidence of the conspiracy to destroy my career through defamation and professional sabotage. Tyler's presence at the party created an opportunity for the most emotionally challenging part of my performance. When he approached to express awkward regret about our relationship ending, I forced myself to appear genuinely grateful for his honesty while encouraging him to explain how he had realized we were incompatible. His response revealed extensive coordination with Celeste and Brittany about relationship sabotage, financial manipulation, and information sharing that constituted multiple felonies related to identity theft and fraud. The crucial moment came when Celeste gathered the French-speaking guests in the living room for what she announced as a toast to Dad's health and our family's bright future. Speaking in French for the benefit of her European business associates, She began describing their successful strategy for managing difficult family situations and protecting valuable assets from irresponsible relatives. Her toast became a detailed confession of fraud, manipulation, and criminal conspiracy delivered to a room full of witnesses who assumed I couldn't understand a single word. As Celeste's French confession continued, she revealed the full scope of their criminal enterprise. Systematic targeting of wealthy families with vulnerable elderly parents, sophisticated techniques for creating false evidence and manipulating legal documents, and coordination with criminal networks across multiple states and countries. She bragged about their success rate and their ability to avoid prosecution by selecting victims who were too isolated or discredited to fight back effectively. Brittany's contribution to the confession was even more damaging. She described specific techniques for poisoning victims without detection, methods for forging legal documents that would pass professional scrutiny, and strategies for manipulating family dynamics to isolate target individuals from potential support systems. Her casual discussion of previous victims and their current criminal projects provided evidence of ongoing felonies that would support federal racketeering charges. When Franklin Walsh joined the conversation to discuss legal strategies for completing their takeover of Dad's estate, his participation provided evidence of attorney misconduct, conspiracy to commit fraud, and suborning perjury that would result in disbarment and criminal prosecution. His detailed explanation of document forgery techniques and judicial manipulation tactics was particularly valuable for federal investigators building cases against corrupt legal professionals. The evening reached its climax when I stood up and announced in perfect French that I had understood every word they had said for the past 3 years. The silence that followed was absolute, as the implications of my revelation sank in among the assembled guests. Celeste's face went white, Brittany began stammering denials, and Franklin Walsh immediately began calculating legal strategies for damage control. I continued speaking in French, Spanish, Italian, German, and Portuguese, explaining to the multilingual guests exactly what crimes they had just confessed to and how their conversations had been recorded as evidence for federal prosecution. The panic that spread through the room was immediate and comprehensive as people realized they had just provided detailed confessions to multiple felonies while surrounded by law enforcement surveillance equipment. Detective Rivera chose that moment to enter with federal agents and local police to begin making arrests. The warrants had been prepared based on evidence gathered during the previous month, but the evening's recorded confessions provided additional charges that would ensure lengthy prison sentences for everyone involved in the criminal conspiracy. As Celeste and Brittany were led away in handcuffs, still speaking French in desperate attempts to coordinate their stories, I felt a satisfaction that was both complete and terrifying. The people who had systematically destroyed my life were finally facing consequences for their actions, but the process of proving their guilt had required me to become someone harder and more manipulative than I had ever imagined possible. Victory felt like justice, but it also felt like losing parts of myself that I might never recover. The legal proceedings that followed the birthday party arrests were swift and comprehensive in ways that surprised even Miranda and Detective Rivera. The federal prosecutors assigned to the case discovered that Celeste and Brittany's criminal enterprise was far more extensive than any of us had realized, involving dozens of victims across 15 states and 3 countries over the past decade. Their detailed confessions, combined with evidence gathered through our surveillance operation, provided the foundation for prosecutions that would effectively end their criminal careers permanently. Celeste was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison for charges including elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, and 2 counts of attempted murder related to her systematic poisoning of both her previous husband and my father. The prosecutors were able to prove that her medication manipulation had caused Dad's heart attack and would have eventually killed him if we hadn't intervened when we did. Her sophisticated criminal operation and international connections resulted in the maximum possible sentences under federal racketeering statutes. Brittany received 18 years for her role in the conspiracy, including identity theft, document forgery, computer fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. Her technical skills and criminal creativity had enabled many of Celeste's crimes, and her detailed confession about previous victims provided evidence that helped prosecutors build cases against their entire criminal network. The judge noted that her young age was offset by the sophisticated nature of her crimes and her apparent lack of remorse for the families she had destroyed. Franklin Walsh was disbarred and sentenced to 12 years for conspiracy, fraud, and professional misconduct. The investigation into his practice revealed systematic corruption involving multiple criminal organizations, forged legal documents, and judicial bribery schemes that had been operating for years. His conviction led to reviews of hundreds of previous cases and additional prosecutions of other corrupt legal professionals throughout the state court system. Tyler Brooks received probation and community service for his relatively minor role in the conspiracy, though his business relationship with Celeste cost him his startup company and his professional reputation. His cooperation with prosecutors helped secure additional evidence against other accomplices, but his betrayal of our relationship for financial gain was something I found impossible to forgive despite his repeated attempts at reconciliation. Douglas Chun faced professional consequences, including termination from Global Inc. and industry blacklisting for his role in destroying my career based on false information. While his actions didn't rise to criminal prosecution levels, the civil lawsuit Miranda filed on my behalf resulted in substantial financial compensation and public acknowledgement of the injustice I had suffered. Global Inc. offered me a senior management position at double my previous salary, which I declined in favor of pursuing independent opportunities. My father's recovery was both physical and emotional as he came to terms with how completely he had been manipulated and betrayed by people he had trusted with his life and his family's welfare. The medical detoxification from the medications Celeste had been giving him required months of careful treatment, but his cognitive function returned to normal once the deliberate poisoning stopped. Our relationship required extensive counseling to rebuild trust and communication, but the shared experience of surviving their attack ultimately brought us closer than we had been since my mother's death. The financial restoration of Dad's estate required complex legal proceedings to recover assets that had been transferred through various fraudulent schemes. Miranda's team was able to recover approximately 80% of the stolen money, including funds that had been hidden in offshore accounts and properties purchased through shell corporations. The house was returned to Dad's control, though he ultimately decided to sell it and move to a smaller home that didn't carry the traumatic memories of Celeste's occupation. My own recovery was more complicated than the legal and financial resolutions. The months of living undercover while gathering evidence had required me to develop skills in manipulation and deception that felt contradictory to my natural personality. Therapy helped me understand that using these abilities to expose criminal behavior was morally different from using them to harm innocent people, but the experience had fundamentally changed how I understood human nature and relationship dynamics. Professional opportunities emerged from the publicity surrounding the case, including offers from law enforcement agencies interested in my linguistic abilities and undercover skills. I ultimately decided to establish my own consulting firm specializing in multilingual investigation and fraud detection, working with attorneys and law enforcement agencies to identify and prosecute sophisticated international criminal operations. The business grew rapidly as word spread about my unique combination of linguistic expertise and investigative experience. Corporate clients began hiring me to investigate suspected fraud by multilingual employees, while law enforcement agencies requested my assistance with cases involving international criminal networks. The work was financially rewarding and intellectually challenging, but it also kept me connected to the criminal justice system in ways that provided ongoing satisfaction from helping other victims of sophisticated fraud schemes. Miranda Cole became both my business partner and my closest friend, teaching me advanced legal strategies while learning from my linguistic and cultural insights. Our partnership evolved into a specialized practice that combined legal expertise with multilingual investigation capabilities, creating a unique service that attracted clients from across the country dealing with complex international fraud cases. My relationship with my father evolved into something deeper and more honest than our previous family dynamics. The shared trauma of Celeste's betrayal forced us to communicate about difficult topics we had previously avoided, including his feelings about my mother's death, his mistakes in judgment about Celeste, and his pride in my strength and intelligence. For the first time in my adult life, I felt valued and understood by the parent I had always tried so hard to please. The most important lesson from this experience was understanding that true strength comes not from avoiding conflict or trying to please people who don't value you, but from developing the skills and alliances necessary to protect yourself and others from those who would exploit vulnerability for personal gain. My years of secret language learning, motivated by childhood hurt and family dysfunction, had ultimately provided me with the tools necessary to expose criminal behavior and rebuild my life on foundations of truth rather than manipulation. Looking back on the night when I first understood Celeste calling me a pig in French, I realized that moment was the beginning of my transformation from victim to survivor to protector. The languages I learned in secret became weapons against injustice. The skills I developed in isolation became tools for building meaningful relationships, and the pain I experienced from betrayal became motivation for ensuring other families wouldn't suffer the same destruction. Today, when clients hire me to investigate suspected fraud or deception, I often think about how many people suffer in silence because they don't have the resources or knowledge to fight back against sophisticated manipulation. Every case I solve successfully feels like honoring not just my own survival, but also the memory of who I was before I learned that people closest to you can be your most dangerous enemies. The quiet girl who spent too much time with books instead of people had become a woman whose intellectual curiosity and linguistic abilities served justice rather than just personal advancement. Sometimes the skills we develop to survive our worst experiences become the foundation for our greatest contributions to protecting others from similar harm. Have you ever discovered that someone close to you is saying terrible things about you in another language, thinking you couldn't understand? Share your story in the comments below, and let me know how you handled the situation. If this story resonated with you or helped you think about your own family dynamics differently, please hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about overcoming betrayal and finding strength in unexpected places. Don't forget to share this with anyone who might benefit from understanding how manipulation works and how to protect themselves from people who exploit trust and vulnerability. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes our greatest weaknesses can become our most powerful tools for fighting injustice when we learn to use them wisely.